always want to get really lazy and just melt this entire block. Just chuck it in there and then let it burn, because that's exactly what it would do. Hi everyone, I'm Anne-Marie from brambleberry.com, and today I'm here to show you a beginner-friendly project using melt and pour soap. We went back and looked at some of our most popular projects from the last, well, yes, 15 or 20 years, and one of our most popular projects is this spa bar done 12 years ago. So we're updating it for you today. Back then, we used some essential oils that have gotten a little pricey, so we've replaced it with Brambleberry's Lavender 4042 essential oil. In this video, we are also going to get into some tips and tricks for layering melt and pour and making sure your layers stick together. So let's get started. So for this simple project, you're going to need Brambleberry's Shea Butter Melt and Pour. This melt and pour is extra moisturizing because it has, yes, added shea butter in it. It's also white, you'll notice, so anything you do with this will turn more pastel, right? Because you're mixing your color with a white soap base. It works really well for this particular recipe that does great with pastels. Second, we're going to be using two different colorants. One is charcoal, and the second is rose clay. Both have a fantastic reputation for helping with any sort of oily prone skin or acne prone skin, and the rose clay provides very gentle exfoliation. And finally, we're going to be using Brambleberry's most popular essential oil, which is Lavender 4042. That makes this particular recipe also very budget conscious. We only are using 29 milliliters of this lavender in our entire batch because it's a very low usage rate since it's for face. So you could always get the Brambleberry trial size rather than committing to the larger size of the lavender essential oil for this recipe. And then the very final thing that you're definitely going to want to have on hand is rubbing alcohol. In this case, we're using 99% rubbing alcohol. You can use a 91% strength that you can get at any common grocery store or drugstore. It's really essential for keeping your layers together, so be sure to have that rubbing alcohol on hand. I'm also going to use that rubbing alcohol to disperse our colorants ahead of time. This helps to prevent clumping. Now, the reason I'm using rubbing alcohol is it mixes in better to the entire recipe rather than water. Finally, one more thing, that charcoal is lighter than air. So when you're mixing it up, you want to be really careful about mixing it and not having it go poof all over, because charcoal is one of my least favorite things to try and clean. That is for sure. It's a powerful colorant. Now that we've gotten all of our ingredients ready, including prepping our colorants, and I've got the essential oil pre-measured into this container, it's time to get started. So with melt and pour soap, one of the keys is that you chop your soap base up into smaller bits because the smaller bits help to melt down easily in the microwave. If you've never done melt and pour soap before, this channel is chock full of great tips and tricks and recipes and projects, and brambleberry.com has an entire section in its projects area too for melt and pour soap. Our first layer calls for 26 ounces of the melt and pour soap to be chopped up and melted. So I'm gonna go ahead and chop the second one, just about half of it, and then we will get started with melting. Now that our soap base is fully cut, it's time to melt in the microwave. And when you melt in the microwave, you do 30 to 45-second bursts. And the reason for that, even though it takes longer, is because when this is melted and it starts to get hot, it can boil. Boiled melt and pour soap is still soap, but it smells bad and it's extra brittle. And so the layers definitely won't stick together then. So 30 to 45 seconds at a time. Sorry, it's gonna take you like probably 4-ish minutes to melt this. Soap is out of the microwave. And remember, this is our kind of first layer, so it's the white and the pink. And I'm gonna check that temperature. The lower in temp we are, the more separated those colors will stay. If you have too high of a temp, the colors kind of blend together and then there's no point in doing the two different colors. So we're at about 155, 160. And one of the things I always like to do if I need to lower my temperature for melt and pour soap is just put a couple little blocks of melt and pour soap into my existing melt and pour soap base. So I'm gonna do that and just get these to probably like 130. Another thing that'll give us a little bit of time to work with this is we have to add our colors too. So remember, with melt and pour, what you see is what you get. Nothing is going to change colors on us. We already mixed our rose clay with just a little bit of rubbing alcohol to keep it from clumping. And mix, mix, mix. That is a beautiful color. I love the pastel rose clay color. It's very romantic. The last thing I need to do is add my essential oil. So I'm just gonna eyeball this. The second layer, remember, is about 26 ounces. So you're gonna wanna save at least half of that for that second layer. And then when you stir, make sure you stir in fully, because if the essential oil isn't stirred in fully, what can happen is that that essential oil can pop out of the soap, so sort of lift off, and then it will pockmark your silicone molds, and you'll be very sad because the silicone molds won't really be usable again. For this project, I'm using 2 of the Brambleberry silicone round molds. If you don't have 2 of them, you can just have the project and do half of it at a time. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about kind of, hey, what do I have on hand? What do I need to prep? What do I need to buy? Now that my color is in and my essential oil is in, and I have dropped my temps at least 20 degrees, if not 30 with that little trick. Yeah, that's 135 now, and that's 130. We are ready to pour. So we're going to pour slowly and gently into one side, and then pour slowly and gently into the other side. And you're gonna eyeball it. You're going for about half full, remember, because we're gonna do that charcoal layer on the back. And so when you've done about 3 or 4, you're going to stop and spray with some rubbing alcohol. And that rubbing alcohol is going to break the surface tension that those bubbles have created. So that way you have a really nice, smooth back. And so then we're gonna do that again, pouring gently and smoothly from both sides. And remember, if you end up pouring together, it's not that big of a deal. It's soap. This is just a design thing. It kind of makes the soap a little more interesting and appealing looking from the front, having that pink and that white. One of the best tips for layering melt and pour soap is to pour it when the first layer is pretty fresh. So you know when you have poured the soap and you can kind of feel the skin forming. If the skin is thin and you're like, it's not gonna hold another 2 or 3 ounces of soap, don't pour it. But you do want to be pouring it like kind of one right after another. So for example, I wouldn't want to pour this whole first layer and then go to bed and come back the next day. It's kind of a 1-2 punch. So here we have a nice thick layer of skin forming. It'll definitely hold the second layer. I'm going to go ahead and prep the second layer. 143, which is actually not too bad. The main thing you don't want to happen is you don't want that second layer melting your first layer if the first layer just has a thin skin on it. And I'm kind of tempted to show you how thick this skin is by just piercing it. So right here, this is the one that was poured last. And if you look at it, you can see I can pierce it. The skin is it's this thick. When I say it's this thick, sorry, that's not very technical, but it is definitely thick enough to be able to hold this second layer. Now, if it was any thinner than that though, this second layer might end up melting that first layer, because remember, melt and pour soap kind of starts to melt right around 120 degrees for this particular shea butter melt and pour. By the way, I just poured in the last of my Lavender 4042. I'm gonna go ahead and stir it in really thoroughly because we don't want to accidentally damage the soap molds by letting that Lavender 4042 pop out. One of the things I love about melt and pour soap is how easy setup is and how easy cleanup is. Once this is all done, I'm just gonna go ahead and soak my dishes for about 45 minutes until the leftover soap in here kind of turns into almost a thick slime. I'm gonna dump that in the trash, and then I can actually just wash these by hand. Now that the essential oil is in, my colorant is fully mixed in, I'm gonna spray rubbing alcohol on my layers and get to pouring. And the reason I'm doing rubbing alcohol on the layers is because, again, that helps to break up the surface tension and make sure that the layer really does adhere incredibly well to the first layer. Now, if the soap layers don't adhere together, you know what, that's okay. It's not that big of a deal. You can always remelt the melt and pour down because it is just that, melt and pour. There's never really any mistakes when it comes to melt and pour. So just pouring slowly and carefully. One thing I like to do whenever I'm working with layers as well is sort of move my soap around. The reason for that is when you kind of think of the physics of this soap pouring down onto the first layer, if you are only pouring in one spot, you could end up with a kind of a breakthrough in that one spot. So this one is the one that I disturbed earlier to show you kind of how thick that layer was. So I'm being a little bit more careful with it because it did have that one weak point where I Did stick my finger in the middle of it. And I see some bubbles forming, so what do we do with bubbles? We do some rubbing alcohol. Boop, boop. Breaks up the surface tension. And if you're like, but I don't want alcohol in my soap, what's gonna happen with that? It actually all evaporates off. So you do not have any alcohol left in your final soap. Now that these are almost poured, it's time to just let these sit here for the next 4 hours before starting to unmold. And you might be tempted, if you're in a hurry, to put these in the refrigerator or freezer. If you do that, what you might find is that there's a little bit too much humidity that forms when you pull the soap out of the refrigerator or freezer to pop it out. And since Melt and Pour soap has added glycerin in it, that condensation will actually just stick on your soap. These have been sitting in their mold actually overnight, so they're gonna pop out really easy. To unmold silicone molds, all you do is turn them over and then gently push and pull a little bit, and then you can see the airlock breaking. So there we go. One, and then, that looks so pretty. I love the, there we go. I love the double pour here, and my layers are sticking together really nicely. I am gonna show you what happens if a layer doesn't stick together. So I made this one earlier and I deliberately didn't follow the tips for layering. So I waited too long, I didn't spray with alcohol, and I popped it out and it just came apart. So if you're ever struggling because your layers aren't sticking together, be really paying attention to those temperatures and the alcohol. These are ready to give away or use right away. No cure time needed. Thanks so much for watching today's episode. If you have any other requests for videos on Melt and Pour soap, please leave your requests in the comments below. We do read them, and I really want to make content that you are interested in seeing. And if you make this project or any other product with Brambleberry products, please hashtag it BrambleOn on social media. And finally, give us a thumbs up below, subscribe to our channel, and until next time, everyone, happy soaping.